Now let's take a look at the 41st President of the United States, Bill Clinton. Again, the five criteria are growth, finances, international politics, war and security, and most importantly, did it leave the country better or worse? I want to start off this video just in case this is the first one you clicked on and you haven't followed the series, because for Clinton specifically, this matters. We're talking about the presidency. We're not talking about the president specifically. Certainly the actions of the president affect the presidency, but it's also what occurred during his time. We do talk about issues that involve judgment and corruption and morality if they affect the presidency, and we certainly will with regard to Clinton. Obviously, the Quincy scandal and the impeachment that followed are critical discussion points for Clinton, but I think a lot of those fall under the better or worse category rather than the earlier things we're going to discuss. So as you're watching this, understand I'm going to get there. But I also think you need to understand we've been doing this series since the very beginning, going president by president by president. And we started off with presidents who had slaves. We're not having a morality discussion. That's not what this video series is about. This video series is about progress, about what each president did that helped the American country progress forward or caused the American country to regress. Better or worse is the final category that we always go over. And then the other categories, again, also, how did this move us? What direction did it take us? So as I'm talking about Bill Clinton, understand I'm not here saying, oh, he's a great person, he's a great man, da, da, da. I'm not saying that about any of the presidents. I'm talking about what happened during the presidency and how it affected the country. And in terms of growth, which is the first category, I don't know how you don't say that he had great success in terms of growth. And for growth and finances, I wouldn't combine them, but I think both of those categories are areas where during Clinton's presidency and continuing on from Clinton's presidency, the decisions that he made set an incredible foundation for the people that came after him. He had a Goldilocks economy. You can say that he had a Goldilocks economy because George W. Bush made some of the difficult decisions, and that's part of why I gave George W. Bush such high rankings with regards to better or worse. But a Goldilocks economy means unemployment was low and inflation was low. And GDP grew. Everything good that you can expect from an economy was happening during Clinton's presidency, and the decisions he made and that occurred during his time created a very strong and stable economy. Whether the shifts in those economies that came from things like NAFTA, which was signed under George H.W. Bush, which I'm thinking back of all the things I should have said about George H.W. Bush with regards to like the Rodney King riots and other things, but we're past that now. NAFTA and all of that, whether you believe that gutted our manufacturing base and all that kind of other stuff, which again we'll discuss in better or worse. On the whole, on the aggregate, the country grew into a financial industry, into an economic powerhouse, even beyond what it was before. And that engine is still revving along right along today. The tech industry, which blew up during the 1990s and really became foundational to the United States, did not have to necessarily be foundational in the United States, but it was. Google, founded by people who came, I think founded by Sergey Brin, who wasn't born in America, came to America, created this company that is now huge. So much opportunity emerged in the 1990s from people who came here, and this was the base of operations to expand and create an economic boom. That happened during the Clinton administration. That falls on his watch, and those are all things that I don't think you can argue growth and finances weren't positive. In terms of social growth, I always read people who are very critical of a lot of the social policies of the Clinton era, and I'm sitting here as an old man. I'm not old, but I'm old to most of the people who are watching videos on the internet, I think. I was alive and old enough to vote during the Clinton administration. I remember Don't Ask, Don't Tell being controversial, not because it didn't go far enough and it was dehumanizing, but because it went too far. And how dare you even think homosexuals have a right to even be considered to be in the military? What a crazy and ludicrous idea that was at that time. I remember when people watched the Rodney King riots during the Bush administration, and many of them were like, yep, the police absolutely had to take batons out and beat that man to unconsciousness because they perceived that situation as dangerous to the police and not as humanizing Rodney King and the riots that proceeded out of that. I remember that. I remember how bad the crime was generally because of the incredible crime boost from the 1970s through the 1980s, the crack wars, and all of that going on. And I remember all of that, and I remember how much all of that got better throughout the 90s. Did not get perfect, but got better. I remember when the crime bill was passed, and I'm looking back and reading people talking about how horrible the crime bill was, and I often point out to them, even Bernie Sanders voted for the crime bill. It had many, many flawed things in there and absolutely led to mass incarceration. And there are many things you can criticize about in that bill. But it was passed because crime had become so dangerous. And after it got better. I'm not saying it got better necessarily because of all parts of the crime bill, although some parts of the crime bill I do think did cause some improvements. I think it got better because economically we started investing in dealing with a lot of the mental health needs, a lot of the crises, a lot of the issues that had been disinvested during the Reagan administration and even before in the 1970s. Because I think sometimes too much gets put on Reagan. I think defunding started earlier than that, and failing to fund is always an issue. I remember how much changed during the 1990s, and while Bill Clinton is a horribly flawed human being who made a lot of bad decisions, which we will talk about when we get to better or worse, that I think were hugely negatively impactful on the United States. I don't think you can say with regards to growth, with regards to finances, that his presidency was negative. I think he did remarkably well, and I think he scores very high in those two categories. In terms of international politics, I do think he scores high because of things like the Oslo Accords and with regards to particularly the Good Friday Agreement. But I can see people saying he fell short with regards to things like Somalia, Rwanda, Haiti. Even in the Balkans, the response was a little bit too late, even if I think he did a very good job of balancing it. I would say overall, in terms of international policy and politics, I would rate him above average. I wouldn't say he was exceptional. In terms of war and security, this is again where I still think it's slightly above average, but I do understand the mixed bag. And this is an area where I will say the mass incarceration, I don't think made our country more secure. I don't think it improved our country in that way. I also think some of the decisions he made in international politics later came back to bite us with regards to Afghanistan and Osama bin Laden and things like that. Not to say that Bill Clinton it's Bill Clinton's fault that Osama bin Laden committed 9/11, which we'll talk about in the next presidency. Not to say any of that. It's more comparative. I would say I still rank him above average in terms of war and security because we did not get entangled deeply in any of the messes, but I can't say that Rwanda or Somalia was handled well. Black Hawk Down famously was not particularly handled well. And I think I can't say he's in one of the greatest of all times. I would say he's well above average, but I'm not going to put him in one of the greatest all time. But it's also because he didn't really have to confront a thing like his predecessor did with George H.W. Bush, I should say, in the Gulf War, or even, going back deeper into history with all the various wars that came to this country. Now we move on to, I think, what is the most important category, and the one that's the most difficult to talk about with regards to Bill Clinton, and is that did he leave the country better or worse? I think he inherited a very good hand from George H.W. Bush. I think he was given an opportunity to have a strong economy, and he did. His presidency was able to take that and move forward. However, I do think some of the things done with regards to deregulation, whether or not that was something he wanted to pass or Congress wanted to pass, is a point of debate that I would have. I think with regards to deregulation eventually came back to bite us because I think that the foundations for the housing crisis, although I do not agree that they were Fannie and Sallie Mae caused, I believe they were caused by increased deregulation going forward. I think deregulation generally brought us things like Enron, and that wasn't enough of a warning, but I'm kind of moving into the Bush administration. I think the general idea of deregulation went too far and created the foundations for what would eventually become a huge economic crisis far later on. I don't think he's responsible for that because I think it's far enough away from his presidency that it could have been corrected, but I think it's a point of discussion. I do think the fact that he took advantage of an intern in the Oval Office and didn't resign is a fundamental problem that has now created an aura around the presidency that is absolutely negative to American history. I think if Bill Clinton had resigned, I would probably give him a far higher ranking than I'm currently giving him. Because had he resigned, we would still have an understanding that the American president isn't above being able to be publicly shamed out of office, isn't above reproach, isn't that the expectations of our presidency should be higher, that we should expect more from our leaders. Whether that's accurate or fair is a separate conversation. Obviously, as again, we've gone through this throughout 40, if you're I've been watching this in the beginning, we've gone through this with 40 presidents, and a good 30 of them have had horrible things that I can point to and say, yep, that person was pretty bad. That person did something that was pretty egregiously bad. I can point to a huge moral failing in the same realm as Bill Clinton. Slavery, obviously, hell of a lot worse. So, this is not about the moral failings of Bill Clinton having an affair with an intern. This is about the fact that when Bill Clinton had an affair with an intern, he didn't resign. He continued to stay in office because he was popular enough to do it. I talked about this during the during Nixon with Watergate. How I don't believe Watergate was a huge scandal that brought Nixon down. I believe Nixon was incredibly unpopular at a time when Watergate happened, and so Watergate, because of his unpopularity, was why you could take him down. Clinton, on the other hand, was so enormously popular because the economy was going well, because because the country was doing so well that he didn't have to resign. But the right thing to do, and what would have been better for the country, would have been for him to resign. In the same way, the right thing for George H.W. Bush was to condemn the NRA and was to raise taxes. He did those things and he suffered the consequences. Jimmy Carter allowed Paul Volcker to jack up interest rates and collapse the economy to stop inflation, and he lost because of it. They did the right thing for the country and they suffered at the ballot box as a result. Bill Clinton did not do the right thing. And I think because he did not do the right thing, we are now living in a post-Clinton era where the presidency is greatly diminished and the expectations of presidents are greatly diminished. And I think that means the country is worse off because of him in a lot of ways. That all being said, that's counterbalanced by the fact that he left an incredibly good economic situation, and he made huge strides with regards to civil rights, with regards to the rights of homosexuals. He did so many positive things that better or worse scale falls right around 4.6. Right in that area of like not, I'd say slightly worse than better, but not bad. And all of this kind of reminds me of James Madison, who right now is sitting at number 13 on my sheet, because he did such a good job on other things, but he let the Capitol get burned to the ground. He is rated very highly, despite a foreign power coming in and burning our Capitol to the ground. So what do I do with Bill Clinton in that context? Incredibly high in growth, incredibly high in finances, relatively high in international politics, relatively high in war and security, and not that low in terms of better or worse. I think a very strong argument could be made that he did leave the country better than he found it, but he also left this issue of his personal failings and his not having consequences for it and how that's chased us going forward. So with all of that in mind, I think I'm going to put him just above another very flawed president, James Polk, at number 9. Now, I can already hear the comments screaming that's way too high. Again, incredibly great economy and left a budget surplus. That doesn't happen. He created a Goldilocks economy and left a budget surplus for a successor. The fact that he's not in the top 5 is because of his moral actions. If not for the Lewinsky scandal and the impeachment, I would probably have him second. I would probably have him below Washington, obviously below Washington and Lincoln, but I would have him right up there with James Monroe. It's only that issue that kicks him down to number 9.